What is your childhood memory that you thought was normal but realized it was traumatic later in your life? When I was 0.8 till I was about 10, the school's teacher would sometimes pull me out of recess to sit down with me and play weird games. I hated it because it meant I wasn't outside writing my stories, and besides, I was a native English speaker. Why did I ever need to do anything with the ELS teacher? Yeah, turns out she was a counselor, and she was trying to get enough information to show that I had signs of autism/AD/a learning disorder to give to the National Health Service and get me an actual psychologist because my parents were refusing to send me to one. Unfortunately, her husband died before she could finish, and I didn't end up going to one until I was 17, when I was legally allowed to do that sort of thing on my own. Edit, because some of you are a tad confused. Yes, I did actually have AD. Oh shit, that was so much worse than I thought it was. I said the else thing. It's the fact that the teacher had to play improper psychologist because my parents refused to take me to an actual psychologist despite having every ability and reason to do so, which is considered negligence and is technically abuse of some sort. Either that, whenever a kid got home late it was normal for them to be locked outside for the night. Also thought an appropriate response to not doing your chores was to be locked in a closet without food. My younger siblings never got this treatment. I just thought I was an extra awful child. My father and I had a game when I was a child. Help daddy remember what hospital he went to last. My father was mentally ill and would hurt himself purposely to get more anxiety, antipsychotic and pain drugs. There were 5 hospitals within a 2-hour drive of us, and in those days, early 90s late 80s, there were no computer systems to track him like there is now. He would literally break his own fingers, burn himself with oil, anything to get what he needed. And it was my job to help him remember, so he wouldn't get caught. After he took his life, when I was 12, I had a lot of feelings and scary memories to deal with. It's been a long hard road, but I hope wherever his is, he's not in pain anymore. One year on Halloween, I was probably about 8 or 9 years old. My mom didn't let my sister and me go outside to do some trick or treat in the neighborhood, but bought us a new Barbie movie and lots of sweets instead. Also, we were allowed to stay up as late as we wanted to. It was because she was afraid our parents were divorced, father abusive, would try kidnapping us. He had tried before. Still, it is one of my most treasured childhood memories because we had a great evening. Just my mom, my sesame. My brother used to scream at me and physically and mentally abuse me. He said it was just an older brother thing. Also, the way my schizophrenic dad acted when he was off his meds. I thought it was hilarious when he described his suicide attempts because I thought, who would die on purpose? I often heard him retell his stories to make me laugh. I feel extremely guilty now. When I was in kindergarten, they would make us kneel in a corner on some wood piece or STH. That was utterly painful for every time we hurt each other or cursed, which happened a lot apparently, and as soon as I got to elementary school I asked the teacher the first time I was in trouble where I should go kneel. They took attention to that, and long story short they called the police on our old kindergarten and it's now closed since 2006. My mother used to let me skip school a lot to take me to the hospital to see my older sister. We'd have hospital campouts where I'd sleep in the hospital bed with my sister and she'd sleep in the recliner chair provided for parents. It's now that I realize she'd do that because everyone, doctors, child psychiatrists, social workers, even friends and family, told her she needed to give me as much good memories with my sister as possible before she died. Surprisingly, that's not the traumatic memory. On those hospital campouts she used to make me memorize a nursery rhyme. She'd sing it to me, then make me sing it back to her over and over. It was to the tune of Hickory Dickory Clock, because I used to watch Play School a lot, so it was one I loved but one that wouldn't come up in school, so there was no risk of teachers asking us to play it on recorders then wondering why I was singing the wrong lyrics. She drilled it into my head so heavily that I still remember the lyrics. The first verse was about my dad, that he was abusive, and that I couldn't be placed with him. The second verse was about my godmother, her name and her phone number, that she had documents to prove the abuse, and that she will take me in. I realize now that my father was severely abusive to my mother, and my mother was constantly trying to prepare me in case he killed her. Whether it looked like an accident or not, she needed me to be able to tell the police officers that he was abusive, that my godmother's number is his, that she has evidence, and will take me in. I learned the nursery rhyme when I was 4. I guess it was the only way she could ensure a 4-year-old would memorize information like that. My dad going to the bar every night, and only got to see him when he was drunk or not at all. Always had a plate of dinner saved for him. He would usually scream at my sisters and mother if he did get home early enough. On a side note, reading this post is sad as fuck. When I was around 8, my best friend at the time used to steal bad food from her pantry and would go into her room and she'd then explain to me how we had to be skinny because being skinny meant boys would like us, and so she would then meticulously read the backs of the cookie packs and count out every cookie and how many calories there were for each of us. She also was obsessed with shaving all her body and would try and pressure me into shaving my legs and arms. Once again, boys liked it when you were hairless. I never really grasped how bizarre it was for 8-year-olds to count calories and be hairless for boys. Years later, my primary school had a national scandal where 10 to 12-year-olds were sexually abusing each other on the mat during class, at lunchtime, and any opportunity they had. I can remember lots of peer pressure for kids to finger each other and make out because that meant you were cool and liked by the hot boys. I was very fortunate to not be involved, and looking back it honestly so fucked up. Don't know if any of it was related, but just from 7 to 12 it was quite gross. My older sister used to play our Disney read along tapes to my younger brother and I, whilst guiding us through the words in the books. She taught us to read this way. I didn't realize till years later that she was using the tapes to cover the sound of our parents fighting downstairs. It saddens me that she never got to have a childhood. When I was young, I was really good friends with a girl whose grandparents lived across the street, and we got along really well and would hang out all the time. At some point, I was maybe 4 or 5 at the time, she invited me to her uncle's house, and they had a big above ground pool built into their deck, and we went swimming. Eventually we got out, but we both wanted to get back in, and the uncle said if we wanted to go back into the pool we had to skinny dip. Again, we were both no older than 5. But we did. It took a long time for me to realize the severity of the situation, the implications. IDK. Half of me feels like it was harmless. Half of me is like, damn, who the fuck does that? This question reminds me of that redditor whose mom made him have a butt plug in at all times in fear of the devil doing butt stuff or something. The mom got busted when he had to use the bathroom during school and asked the teacher to help remove his poop plug, or whatever he called it as a kid. Was truly a fucked up story in a similar AskReddit thread. My mom leaving me at different places with different people for months at a time, or when we would be driving. I remember there would be times where she would tell me about the school she was going to take me to, and that I would live there. I remember her describing the horses they had, lies, and how much I would love it. She never ended up taking me there, but would always talk about it like it was some magical place. Found out from my uncle years later it was an orphanage. Only reason she didn't end up taking me is because he threatened to kill her if she did. When I was about 10, my mother had to leave the country for work for almost a year, so she left me to live with her longtime boyfriend. Every night he'd come home drunk, which I thought was hilarious. He'd come into my room and sit on my bed touching me, especially on the butt, and tell me how much I look like my mother, and try to pull my sheets off. I'd just pretend to sleep. I got annoyed that he kept waking me up, so I started locking my door at night. The fucker broke off the lock and kept doing it. He also once threw a plate at me he missed for giggling at lunch. I never thought of telling my mum about this because I thought it was normal. Every time my dad would pick me up from school, he'd leave me in the car for 3+ hours whilst he went into the local pub and got drunk. Nothing to do, just sitting there in the car. He'd come back after the few hours had passed and throw me a bag of chips as he started the car. I always thought I was the luckiest boy in the world to be getting those chips. Edit. The response to this has been beyond overwhelming. Even when I wrote this, I didn't think it was half as big a deal as I have come to realize from this post. Thank you so much to all those who shared stories and sympathies. The world has some nasty people, but goddamn, does it have some beautiful people too. One of the things that makes Reddit great is that there are so many of the latter to be found. Thank you. For those of you who shared similar stories, I hope you find a little peace out of realizing how many of us there are. I sure do. Finally, if those of you in my boat feel inadequate, suffer from imposter syndrome, compulsive need to apologize and make right, shame for resenting your dad in spite of knowing he did some shitty things, anxiety, shame or a host of other little ever-present storm clouds, just know you're not alone. This thread has helped me realize where many of these issues have come from. I hope you all get past it and use the memory of it as a tool to do right with your kids one day. Be happy, you're worth a space occupy. When I was in the 2nd grade, my older sister came into the bathroom while I was taking a bath to play with my toys with me. I didn't find out until later it was because my father was having a stroke from drinking too much and was making sure I didn't finish taking a bath before the paramedics arrived. My stepdad would frequently play fight me and my sister when my mom wasn't home, but his play fighting was actual abuse. Most of the abuse was punching and stuff, but the worst one I remember was him tying me to a chair with a shit ton of duct tape and tying my mouth and just leaving me there for over an hour. My mother would have to regularly go on rescue missions to stop my grandmother from killing herself. I would get phone calls saying I'm on the way to grandma's again. In middle school, I started getting a lot of stomach itches due to undiagnosed acid reflux. I was also a really anxious kid, so I feared I was gonna throw up a lot. Thus, almost every night I'd take half a Tums. When I offhandedly told my best friend, she looked terrified. "I think you might be addicted to Tums," she said. We had just learned about addiction, and I told her I didn't feel withdrawal without the medicine, and that I was just taking it as prescribed. She still seemed unconvinced, so I told her she was being silly and dropped it. In high school, I learned her brother's drug addiction had been tearing the family apart, and she was probably terrified one of her closest friends was using too. One time my dad threw a temper tantrum and threw a plate full of food at the ceiling because my mom hadn't gotten the right sauce. I thought it was funny at the time, but looking back, that's an awful way for an adult to act. My parents told me that I had a learning disorder, and that's why I was failing in school. I was too stupid to do better. It wasn't until I was an adult that I figured out it was bullshit. No learning disorder, just low self-esteem due to their shitty parenting. Went to pick up my uncle at a crack house when I was like 11. People sprawled out everywhere. Some lady was on the couch sleeping naked. Me and my cousins were just snickering cause we got to see boobies. As a kid, I used to brag about being able to sleep for over 24 hours straight to friends or teachers or really whoever would listen. I was mid-sentence mentioning it as a freshman in college when I realized my divorced father was drugging preschool me with cold meds, so I'd sleep through his weekends of custody with me. It really fucked up my sense of reality for a while.